All right. So here we are, week 3 of this Kingdom Within series. And again, the hypothesis is that the presence of God is everywhere, everywhere you look, in everyone, throughout the entire cosmos. The universe is filled with God's presence. So it's like jumping off of a cliff into the water. There's really no way to miss it. It's a done deal. It's already done. But we tend to feel separate from God and desire more intimacy with God, more sense of God's presence. And a lot of times it can feel like God maybe is not present at all, is far away. And so that paradox is what we're exploring in this series. And I like to mention this every week, just that we're really like heavy on theory, like I'm talking a lot in these meetings. Um, and that is hopefully like providing a really interesting and relatable framework for which all of us to dive into practices. So the hope is you're practicing on your own throughout the week. Um, I've mentioned this in the emails. I don't know how you guys do with starting new habits, if this is a new habit, but I find like finding a rhythm I can really commit to, even if it's humble, like once a week, like keeping it fun is a great way to get some momentum going. And then it sort of takes off. But no pressure. No pressure to practice. Won't be on the test on the final exam. And um, and the coolest thing here is that I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. That the thing that ultimately we're trying to talk about here, this kingdom within, is is totally your own and accessible in your own way. So these are really maps and not meant to be the truth. Okay, so just recapping from last week. So we wake up in the world bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and the baby is perfect. And it feels like we're looking to the eyes of an angel or the eyes of God and those innocent little baby eyes. And the baby is just experiencing life for the first time, living in paradise, and has no judgments about it. Really hasn't eaten from the tree of good and evil yet. And life is just unity, unity with mom, dad, the carpet, the toys, brother and sister. There really isn't a sense of being a separate, autonomous individual person. And we have been looking at this map. We're going to look at this more tonight, of the mindfulness practice, going from being ego-centered to more of a boundless awareness of God's presence. And for the baby, it's not even this feeling like a body amidst God's presence. It's just pure awareness. It's just aware of whatever's going on. And for a baby, life is like a roller coaster, just happening to them, which can be pretty chaotic. And as a result, as just a part of our natural human development, we develop this sense of self that helps us to navigate in a smoother, more controlled way. So around 2 years old, we develop this sense of me as opposed to everything else, not me, other people, objects, the world. And this really divides the world in two and creates that sense of separation, the fall from grace. So separate from God, and with separation comes mine, division and violence. And so from a young age, we begin mapping the world, trying to develop this ability to know what it is, to know what's going to happen, to know if I'm safe, what are the risks, what are the dangers. And all of this is the sort of constructed maps of the world on top of this sense of me. Me is like the compass of the map. And we go on a long journey of defining me and expressing me, trying to be a good me, finding out who me is, which culminates in a fully functioning adult contributing to society, among other options. Um, and maybe it's happily ever after from there, or maybe not. Maybe life as an adult feels kind of dull, or potentially empty and hollow. And so there's this opportunity to let go of the maps and return to that innocence we knew as a baby, return to a state of not knowing. And as adults, this return to not knowing is not just returning to being a baby, it is somehow bringing all of these powerful capabilities we've learned as a separate person back to that sense of innocence. And we kind of summed it up, mapping this against the sort of normal Christian milestones. So we start with creation and then the fall, uh, and then a long journey to a kind of death, surrender, and resurrection as a new person, as a spirit, as a whole person, which is very much symbolized by the death and resurrection of Jesus. All right, so this week we are going to travel east to a very foreign place for some of us, maybe all of us, maybe who knows, but certainly very foreign from how I was raised. And like a good trip, like good travel, I think spending some time squarely in some Eastern thought and religion and philosophy um, will do us good and show us a lot of things that we may have not considered, like a good trip. So once upon a time, a baby is born, a different baby. This baby's name is Siddhartha Gautama. I actually don't even know how his last name is. What a, it's bad. But this is the guy who becomes the Buddha. So Siddhartha is a baby boy. He is the king's firstborn. So around 2,500 years ago in what's now Nepal, um, Siddhartha is born into the regional king's family. So he's born into a perfect situation, wealth and security. For him, it really is paradise. He's won the lottery. But the king receives a prophecy that his son will either be a great king or a great spiritual leader. And he really doesn't want him to become a spiritual leader. He wants him to become a king. And so, to keep this under control, the king sets a really strict protocol of protection for his son and forbids his son from ever leaving the palace. He wants his son to be a king and not a spiritual guru. And so Siddhartha lives a life of luxury and seclusion. His father, the king, intentionally shelters him from experiencing any harshness or suffering. So very sheltered. So we essentially have this abnormally prolonged innocence, delayed separation. In the story, he's a 29-year-old man with a pregnant wife, and in the story, still hasn't experienced separation. He hasn't left the palace until one day he's finally able to pull together a series of chariot rides to take him outside the palace walls. And the king has all the streets cleared. The king doesn't want him to see any unpleasantness. And under these conditions, the king allows him to leave the palace. But through divine intervention, the king's attempts are thwarted, and Siddhartha encounters a surprise, which are known as the four sights. So the first sight is an old man, which represents impermanence. The second sight is a sick man, which represents the unsatisfactoriness of life. The third sight is a corpse, representing the inevitability of loss. It's a little hard to tell, but there's a bird eating out this guy's guts. And the fourth sight is a monk meditating peacefully, and in a way is the most disturbing image of all, um, because the monk is amidst all of this horror and sitting there serenely. So from this excursion, Siddhartha is deeply troubled by the realization that he could get sick and die, and is deeply stirred by the image of this peaceful renunciant, looking calm and unperturbed. So this changes everything for him. I mean, this is where the illusion of paradise is broken, and he is not the same man anymore. He returns to the palace, deeply vexed, realizing that no luxury, pleasure, power could protect him or anyone from aging, illness, and death. He's not going to be able to go back to normal life. And now everything in the palace feels hollow and temporary. And his wife even bears a son whose name literally means fetter. And in great grief, Siddhartha leaves the palace, knowing that he must leave everything behind if he's to finally understand why we suffer and whether there's any possible freedom from this suffering. So he leaves everything, his title, his family, his name, and sets out to find peace. He tries extreme renunciation, punishing the body. He tries deep concentration, dissolving into bliss. He masters every technique the world has to offer. And yet, unsatisfactoriness remains. That same subtle ache. Something still grasped. Some part of him was still trying to become someone, to get somewhere. And so he stops. He sits beneath this fig tree, the Bodhi tree, and he vows that he's not going to move from this tree until he achieves full enlightenment. And so this is where things really start cooking. This guy Mara, the tempter, he shows up. He looks scary, and he does his best to stop this commitment that Siddhartha has just made. So he starts with trying to seduce Siddhartha with his beautiful daughters, symbolizing desire. And then he summons a terrifying army of demons, symbolizing fear and distraction. And finally, he challenges Siddhartha with doubt, saying, "Who do you think you are to attain enlightenment?" But through the night, Siddhartha patiently watches his mind. Memories arise, desires cling, fear whispers. He sees thoughts arise and vanish. Sensations come and go. His sense of himself forms and dissolves. And no matter where he looks, he doesn't find anything solid, nothing that truly lasts and never disappears. Even himself, even his sense of self is seen to be another temporary experience passing through awareness that doesn't continuously persist as a permanent thing. It's just like the temptations and thoughts and desires and fears that arise to awareness and pass away. He sees that this me that developed around age 2 is not the foundation of who he is. The me who fears old age, sickness, and death. That me who wanted to find freedom from suffering and looking for salvation. And it's not that he's dead or gone or absent. It's more that he discovers that his own sense of himself and his personal identity was just another loud experience grabbing for his attention. Everything is coming and going, even his own sense of self. And amidst all of these changing contents, he described it as there was this awake, empty, luminous awareness, the very fact of presence itself, the fact that there is something rather than nothing. He describes what he finds as unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, limitless peace. And this gets formulated into what are called the 3 marks of existence. So this is kind of a classic Buddhist formulation. So anicca, the truth that everything changes and is constantly changing. Dukkha, clinging to what change hurts. And trying to cling to any of the changing contents of experience is what creates dis-ease and that sense of separation. And anatta, that there is actually no unchanging self to possess or protect. This self we've been carrying like a shield, my story, my control, my judgments, is not a thing, but rather a flow. And when you stop holding it so tightly, a different kind of presence emerges. One that doesn't need to be defended, that can meet each moment without gripping, one that's free. And this is called Buddha mind. And the Buddhists believe that this capability lies dormant within everyone. And we'll get into this more next week. We'll be focusing on Jesus, but I believe that this is the same discovery Jesus makes at his baptism roughly 500 years later in a totally different part of the globe. When the presence of God descends like a dove, and Jesus realizes that he's not the person he thought he was. He's actually one with the Father. That is his true identity. So that's the cliffhanger. We'll pick up on there next week. But before we practice, I've got two other kind of topics I wanted to dive into. And one is more a square kind of picture of what mindfulness is, building on what we just talked about with the Buddha story. So the picture with mindfulness is that, like all of the temptations and threats and noise that came Siddhartha's way under the Bodhi tree, we also find ourselves as this lone individual bombarded by thoughts, feelings, sounds, desires, aversions, emotions, tastes, smells, sights, attitudes. And we're doing our best to just manage everything based on what we know. And it's actually possible to discover that the sense of self that's trying to manage everything, to earn it, to save it, to win it, to enjoy it, to be happy, that whole energy that we identify as me is another thing in my experience out there grabbing for my attention. And that who and what we really are is this awake, empty, luminous awareness, presence itself, the presence of God. And all of these worldly contents of life are within awareness. Awareness is unconditionally present, knowing all of them. And realizing this creates immense freedom and grounds our sense of identity, not in a temporary human identity, but in eternal, unconditional love. And so mindfulness is really a pathless path, simply the practice of recognizing that all the things we worry about are not truly who we are, and getting clear on who we are is spiritual transformation. They say that a prophet isn't somebody who has special knowledge. A prophet is just the one who's not confused while everybody else is confused. And that lack of confusion is what makes all the difference. So again, by our own human nature, around the age of 2 and moving forward, we create this sense of self located in our heads as an ego center in order to protect ourselves from all this stuff that's happening. And by creating this internal headquarters, we essentially feel that we can create some distance from these difficult feelings, scary emotions, other people. And by creating this distance from them, that will keep us safe and give us a sense of control. And we can learn to expand our awareness so that it's totally open. And we discover that we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings, we're not our emotions, our sights, our senses, we're not even our bodies. We are at bottom this presence of God, this peace of God that passes understanding. In John 3, Jesus tells Nicodemus that no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. And this is what I think he's talking about. that we realize we are not actually mortal physical things. We are spirit. The same spirit shining in those pure, innocent eyes from the very beginning. And from this return to innocence, we see that our true identity is good, is union with God, is wholeness, is completeness. And the spirit, the presence of God, once recognized, has so much capacity to include the body, include our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and all this other stuff. The teacher that I've resonated with the most, this guy Locke Kelly, he has this great line that awakening to the spirit is the only way to live a fully intimate human life. That until we awaken, we actually don't have the capacity to be with all of life, because only the spirit has the capacity to include all the difficult things. And from the point of view of awareness, fear isn't death. Fear is just fear, and fear is welcome. Like a child who runs into their parents' bedroom after just having had a nightmare. Parents are there to calm the child, and we can learn to be that for ourselves just by being. We can learn to welcome parts of ourselves that feel shameful, angry, afraid, unworthy. All of it is welcome, and all of it becomes unconditionally known and beloved. And so mindfulness is simply the practice or capacity to shift and live more from that place of boundless awareness, able to include and love everything in life. Ultimately, it's not really a skill you develop. It is like learning to walk, like a baby learning to walk or a child learning to ride a bike. It has that kind of practice makes perfect quality to it. But ultimately, practice is the same whether you're just starting or you've been doing it for 10 years. It's the same practice. It's pretty magical. All right. And then the other topic I wanted to hit on, which we have been talking about, but not explicitly, is non-duality. Non-duality is like a great word. For me, it's like like the Rosetta Stone. That was this object that enabled different languages to be translated between each other. And non-duality is simply the idea that things that appear to be separate are not actually separate. So duality implies two or multiple. If you think of a duel, two guys getting guns and shooting each other. So duality, multiplicity, more than one thing. And non-duality indicates that although there are many things, they're ultimately not separate. They exist in a kind of non-separate, non-relationship diversity. To even say that they're in a relationship already implies too much distance. And while unity is a great word, we'll use that a lot, it really isn't quite the right word because unity doesn't include any diversity. And so non-duality as a term does a really good job, a lot of heavy lifting in both accepting and naming diversity without separation. The yin-yang symbol is another iconic symbol communicating non-duality. So obviously with this symbol, the opposites are represented very clearly. We've got white and black, light and dark, good and bad, masculine, feminine, left, right, north, south, hungry, full. Pick anything in existence. It's gonna have an opposite and put it on the yin yang. And the power of the yin yang being this circle is that it shows us that ultimately these opposites aren't separate. The opposites actually depend on each other. There is no light without dark. There is no north without south. They come as a pair and you can't pull them apart. So what appears to be separate is not actually separate. There's this underlying unity within the diversity. And so with mindfulness practice, we start as this ego center, self-centered. I'm a me, I'm separate. And I've been thinking about that Tears for Fears song, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. If I was in charge, things would be a lot better around here, kind of attitude. And by expanding awareness and letting go of that ego center, we learn to directly recognize the presence of God. And that is a revelation. It really is. Oh, wow, God is here, right here. And then we recognize that actually God is the only thing here. That's all that's here, and there isn't anything else. And then we can come back to include everything, ourselves, our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, our worries. But we're doing it from a place where we're no longer separate from God, no longer banished from paradise. We're one with the Father, non-dual, not two. And for me, as somebody who grew up in a very divisive Christian community, where it really was us against the world, and we had the one true faith, and I mean, even the other Christian faiths were like worthless, especially if you were a Catholic, let alone a Methodist. Uh, Whatever, I don't even know what the differences are anymore. But for me, it has been so healing to discover non-duality is in every tradition. It shows up in every religion across the globe throughout history. Um, so there's obviously a lot we could cover in exploring this, but I just want to share a few quotes to kind of illustrate how this mystical unity with God is a natural human experience. So let's start with our guy, Jesus. He has a couple quotes, namely, I and the Father are one. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Good one to take literally. Here's another one from Jesus, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us, I in them, and you in me, that they may become perfectly one. This one comes from one of the great Christian mystics from the Middle Ages, Meister Eckhart. There is something in the soul which is so akin to God that it is one with God. It is not united to God, it is one with God. This one comes from Rumi, 13th century Sufi, Muslim mystic. I searched for God and found only myself. I searched for myself and found only God. This one comes from a 7th century Buddhist scholar. Um, in each jewel of Indra's net, the entire net is reflected, meaning that in each of us, the entire cosmos is reflected. And this one comes from Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah text. He is all, and all is in him. He is the beginning and the end, the visible and the invisible, and there is nothing outside of him. This one comes from a really ancient scripture, the Upanishads, which predates Hinduism in India. There is only one without a second. And then this, I just learned about this and preparing for that. This is from the Lakota tribe, and it's a phrase, I won't try to pronounce it, but it means all my relations. And it's really a prayer that affirms that everything is kin, not metaphorically, but ontologically. Rocks, rivers, animals, stars, all part of one living, breathing being. And lastly, a more modern person, Jack Kerouac. God is not outside us, but is just us, smiling in our smile and scowling in our scowl. And so from all of this, I don't want to put this image of God down, but we start to find a very different picture of God. Not a picture of God that's separate and at a distance from us, but one where God is all and in all. And that's the mystery. As vast as the cosmos, and then as unique and specific as you and me.